Hi, folks. Joey Kelly here. What you're about to see is a run through or a rough draft of a presentation that I did for the 470 Model Railroad Club. However, this is the first go through, and it proved to be about 45 minutes too long. So this is sort of the extended version or the director's cut, so to speak. This is the original form of the presentation, an hour and 45 minutes, more or less. And it contains images that you probably haven't seen before or haven't seen in a long while of the Bangor and Aroostook Railroad, including some that have never been released in the form in which you're about to see them. Enjoy, and this is just a small sampling from the Bangor and Aroostook Railroad Marketing Department collection, and that's just the stuff that survived and that I have access to. So enjoy this, and be sure to check out the Mainline magazine if you're looking for more information on the Bangor and Aroostook. Thanks so much. This presentation called the Bangor and Aroostook that I never saw. And first, a little bit about me. My name is Joey Kelly, and I've been doing photography for 20 years now. I started when the Bangor and Aroostook's bankruptcy hit the news, and I wrote the first and so far only book on the Belfast and Moosehead Lake Railroad, which was published in 2017, coinciding with the railroad's 150th anniversary. Since 2018, I've been publishing new issues of the Bangor and Aroostook's Mainline magazine, which was an employee magazine and has been reborn as an online e-magazine. So a little bit about that. To date, 15 issues plus one April Fool's joke have been produced. All of them are available for free online on the Mainline website at mainlinemagazine.joeykellyphoto.com. A 16th issue should be released either this month or early next. And just for some background, for those that are not as familiar with the Bangor and Aroostook Railroad, Bangor and Aroostook operated from 1891 to 2003. The predecessor of it was the Bangor and Piscataquis, and the successor was the Montreal, Maine, and Atlantic. There were 616 route miles in 1930. 433 in 2000. At the time of its sale in 2003, it was one of only two railroads in the state of Maine operating underneath its original chartered name. This is a segment of a map from 1895 showing the Bangor and Aroostook as it was then, at least on this end of it. And this is notable for a couple of reasons. The branch to Greenville was listed here in full extent. And the southern end, which of course this would be the old Bangor and Piscataquis that the Bangor and Aroostook took over, extends south from South LaGrange through Alton, through Pea Cove, into Old Town, and into Orono, and then down into Bangor. This is the original Bangor and Piscataquis alignment. Obviously, at a later point, that would change. Speaking of later points, the map on the left came from a route card issued by the Bangor and Aroostook Railroad for the use of freight agents for assisting in routing. The card is dated 1972. However, the branch to Greenville was taken up in 1964 and 1965. So why it was left on a route card in 1972, I really don't know. Very hard to explain. But this was the mature, so to speak, Bangor and Aroostook Railroad. The branch to Greenville, the Medford Cutoff running between West Boyce and South LaGrange, the branch to East Millinocket, the branch to Patton, the main line running through Holton up to Fair, Presque Isle, Caribou, Stockholm, Van Buren, the branch line or secondary main running up to Squapan with its branch also known as the Mapleton Cutoff, which allowed you to go from Stockholm to Mapleton and then on to Squapan. and of course the branch up here to St. Francis, and the portion over the top to Fort Kent. Now, if we contrast that with what's on the right, this is the same map, but this is with the portions of the line deleted that would be abandoned after the 1970s. And as you can see, the Greenville branch, gone. The Medford Cutoff, gone. The line to Patton was abandoned. And up north, the main line north of Holton up to Fair was completely abandoned in favor of the route through Squapan up into the west, the sort of the northwesterly portion. And that, of course, when they abandoned that portion, the portion from Holton to Fair, it pretty much killed off the loop that was available up there. But we also have the Mapleton Cutoff having been abandoned, as was the old main line through Stockholm. So Stockholm became completely isolated, and Van Buren would only be serviced by this rather circuitous route going through Madawaska and over to Fort Kent. Also, of course, the branch to St. Francis was abandoned. So about 1/3, roughly, of the Bangor and Aroostook Railroad was abandoned between about 1970 and about 1990. More or less. And of course, the branch to Limestone was pretty much to service the Air Force Base that was outside of Limestone, and when that shut down, the branch went with it. So in reality, service out of Caribou has been curtailed since the middle 90s. And they very rarely today go to Fort Fairfield, although the track is still down. So I need to give some huge thank yous to Sean Duran, to Matt Sawyer, for opening up their collections of items and photographs from the Bangor and Aroostook Marketing Department collections, in addition to my own. That's what you're going to see tonight. I need to thank the Bangor and Aroostook Marketing Department for taking and storing all these photos, and I need to thank, of course, all of the Bangor and Aroostook Railroad employees. And without any further ado, let's get to the photos. So, here are the photos. This may be the oldest photo in the collection. This is actually the Bangor and Piscataquis station in Bangor. This isn't even the Bangor and Aroostocks. This was the one that they would wind up purchasing when they purchased the Bangor and Piscataquis. Next in the roll, so to speak, is this photo, most likely from the same day, same time frame, and this is along the Bangor waterfront, and is sometime in the 1880s, 1890s, not entirely sure on the date on this. We are on the Bangor side. We're looking at Brewer across the river. And I'll tell you, that has certainly changed. We have two roundhouses, one close to us here, one further in the distance. One is most likely the main Central's engine house, and the other is the Bangor and Piscataquis. Of course, by modern era that all of us remember, this was all main Central, and of course now there's very little here except for a single mainline track. This picture comes from 1902 on the Bangor and Aroostook. Obviously, construction is still in progress. There's working passenger trains, however, coming in the distance, and this work train is sitting on the siding over here. Not even really a siding, honestly. It's just kind of cut off and dead ends. So, yeah, a lot going on even in 1902. Here's another very old shot. This is from New Sweden, Maine. And we can see the potato houses, obviously becoming a fixture on the Bangor and Aroostook Railroad. And each of these is, in fact, a Bangor and Aroostook boxcar. And they even have the original The B&A stylized logo on the corner of them. as you can see right there. It's very fuzzy, but that's the original B&A logo. If you ever wondered how in the days before hydraulics and big, heavy tractors and such, they moved bridges and parts of bridges, well, this is how they did it, with winches, block and tackle, steam cranes, men, and animals. And this is a bridge being, abutment being placed sometime in the early 1900s. I do apologize. A lot of these have yet to be identified as to their location. There's no information written on a lot of them. So some of the dates and locations are speculative. This one, however, is definitely Mars Hill, as evidenced by the Mars Hill station, and the potato house in the background, Hovey and Company, Buck brand seed potatoes, and of course this dates from sometime around that same period, early 1900s. We're seeing horses and sleds. This, of course, is not something that one would expect to see in Mars Hill today. This is number 91 after it was rebuilt, has a freshly painted tender, a freshly painted steel cab. The Bangor and Aroostook had a lot of steam locomotives in this smaller vein, these 460s. They had a variety of those. They had some American types, but they seemed to like the Moguls, honestly, for their small engines. However, the larger engines... yeah, that is a 482 Mountain type, number 100. This is most likely taken at Northern Main Junction, parallel to the main Central Main Line. The high telephone poles give that away. Really don't have a good date on this one either, I'm afraid. This one was shot by Paul Douglas, as noted, but where and when, not entirely sure. These are, 252 is an example of the Pacifics that the Bangor and Aroostook had, the 462s. And also, you can see very good example of the horizontally slatted cowcatcher arrangement, somewhat unique as opposed to the more common vertical style. And of course, we can't talk about the Bangor and Aroostook Railroad without talking about the classic, or multiple classic, Bangor and Aroostook Railroad boxcars. This one is one of the earlier variants where it has been painted in a two-tone paint scheme with the main potato logo on it. There's actually been several models of these produced. I'm not 100% sure actually how accurate any of them are, honestly. But there we are. The 6006 resplendent in its main potatoes livery. This particular shot comes to us from Van Buren on March 2nd, 1934, and as you can see, there has been a snow. Enough has come down off of the roofs of the nearby potato houses and been pushed up by the yard trackage to bury these pair of ventilated refrigerated cars. I don't think anything's going to spoil due to it being too warm in this shot, but definitely might freeze. This is a wonderful shot from the collection. This is believed to be the day that 500, most likely 600, although you can't see the number, and probably 501 arrived on the property. This is Northern Main Junction, and we know that for a couple of reasons. The high telephone poles indicating telegraph poles indicating the main central, also the station in the background, and this conveyor belt between the two coaling towers provides a pretty good identification for the spot. We believe this to be 1947. There is no identifiable wear marks anywhere. There are no modifications that have been done to the front of the F unit, and it still has its EMD applied round bottom version of the Bangor and Aroostook Keystone. That was used by Electromotive Diesel on all of the F units, and I really don't know why. It's the only place that we see that in the Bangor and Aroostook's history, with that round bottom look, at least on the locomotives. And it would actually change at some point. So I don't know how many pictures there are of Bangor and Aroostook Steam and Bangor and Aroostook Diesel together in one place, but this is a very special shot. Again, not entirely sure on where this is. Could be any one of the engine houses, but most likely Northern Main Junction, which was where heavy repairs were done. Could also be Oakfield. Could also be Derby. But one of those. But this is a terribly wonderful shot with 330 in the background and the 501 in the foreground. And check out some of that equipment, too. Yeah. Amazing how things have changed, huh? And of course, with the coming of the diesel, we started to get scenes like this, railroads all around the country, but this one is the Bangor and Aroostook outback, probably of Derby shops. Somebody climbed up onto something and shot the dead line of steam locomotives, many of whom would probably not run again under steam. Speaking of which, here's 503 and one of the B units being prepared to tow a long line of Bangor and Aroostook steam south to be scrapped. Interesting to note from this photo, the keystone on the front of the locomotive has been repainted and it now has little notches. It's no longer the round bottom. It's the more traditional keystone shape that we are used to seeing. And we do, of course, have a B unit on behind, which that's interesting in and of itself. Speaking of B units, the Bangor and Aroostook did order B units from Electromotive Diesel, EMD, but they didn't keep them for very long. They sold them to the Pennsylvania Railroad. And if we look closely, we'll see that the Bangor and Aroostook has been painted over, and the numbers have been applied, and I believe that says 9534-3, I think. But they went to the Pennsylvania Railroad, and as far as I know, lived out their service lives there. A little bit earlier shot, this is the 700, the nose of it, one of the two locomotives that the Bangor and Aroostook bought for its two name train passenger trains, the Aroostook Flyer and the Potato Land Special, sharing yard space with the 503 and one of the 600s, the 600 series being the B units. Where this is, really not sure on this one. It is not... certainly not Northern Main Junction, as the manually pushed turntable is not indicative of that. It could be someplace like Caribou. It could be someplace like Fort Kent. Not really sure. And here's the other of the locomotives that the Bangor and Aroostook purchased for its name trains. That's the 700. And as you can see, resplendent in a wonderful gray and blue livery with yellow pinstripes. And interesting shot here at Northern Main Junction in Herman, Maine. This is sort of an interesting crossover shot. We no longer have the conveyor belt running between the two coaling towers. That would have cut across the frame there. The main central's main line, by the way, is over here. And this is the station building, which of course still exists. And this is the scale track used primarily for freight interchange, but not exclusively. And we have an interesting shot here in that we still have wood-sided refrigerator cars, but we have their steel-sided replacements. Also have the small World War II era, I think World War II era, tank cars and whatnot. So this is sort of a coming changes sort of shot. 507, hauling a passenger train, what I would consider to be a very motley mixture of passenger equipment. This is a little bit earlier than those other shots. We still have the round bottom Keystone logo, so factory fresh from Electromotive Diesel, but we have wooden passenger cars there on the front, and we have a steel one behind it, and then we have a couple of the American Flyer, as they were called, passenger cars that the Bangor and Aroostook had. This is at Derby, probably in 1947, based upon the Keystone and the equipment. Another very early shot of 502, which happens to be one of my favorite F units. Certainly my favorite F3. It is as it is the only one still in Bangor and Aroostook paint. But we have extra 502 waiting for a signal from a distant conductor or brakeman. And this is very early in this unit's life. We still have the round Keystone and the factory-applied paint. This, not entirely sure where this is, likely to be the northern end of Northern Main Junction, but that's not actually a certainty. And I do apologize for the lack of certainty in a lot of these, because unfortunately, not being labeled, we're having to rely on identification methods for year and date that are slightly unorthodox. And 507, another early shot with the round Keystone nose. This is the Shriners special train, being run by a Shriner engineer, complete with the fez. And this is a shot that did definitely make the Bangor and Aroostook's Mainline magazine, and I think has been published in at least one of the books. Wonderful shot here, circa 1951, 1952. This is one of the few shots in the collection with the BL2s in their factory-applied paint, but also with the factory-applied 3-digit number. More on that in a moment. This is probably Brownville Junction. Witness the short Canadian Pacific-style stands and the signals. That's a guess, but a reasonable one. And again, this has to be around or slightly before 1952. Bangor and Aroostook did, of course, have switchers. So this is number 800, one of the NW2s that they purchased new from EMD. And if we look behind it, of course, we have this interesting assortment of boxcars and refrigerated cars and whatnot. Not sure, but this might be Northern Main Junction on the area that is now called the Farm, because it was almost literally out in the middle of a field at one point. And inevitably, as the Bangor and Aroostook dieselized, they bought GP7s. And this is Extra 571 headed somewhere, shot from the inside of a F unit. Interesting that it's a lone unit, particularly at this time. The trains were generally heavy enough to warrant at least two, but, short train that day apparently. And I would really love to know where this was. Unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot of identifiable information on this. The Bangor and Aroostook had a lot of sightings for train meets, and I really have no good way of telling, but we do know that this was taken before 1952. So why do I keep mentioning 1952? Well, in 1952, the Bangor and Aroostook ordered GP9s, and when they did so, they ordered them with a 2-digit number. Shortly, everything was renumbered to accommodate. This is number 10, which is the old 700 after renumbering. So this is circa 1953, more or less. This is at the Timony Road crossing in Oakfield, headed northbound for Holton with one of the passenger trains. Again, circa 1953, exact date unknown. And circa 1955 on this, these are Farmall tractors going for delivery up in northern Maine. And this is the 21, which would have been the 802 when new. This is most likely northern Maine Junction and about 1955, given the type of tractor that we see in on the flat cars. But a very cool shot, I have to say. Let's see, 47 after the renumbering and after its rebuild and repainting, of course, into the two-digit number scheme, and the blue and gray with pinstripe, yellow pinstripe scheme that would last for a while into the blue dip paint scheme that we will see later. 47, of course, was later involved in an accident and would become the 49 after some finagling with the insurance companies. And briefly speaking about the New Haven Railroad, the New Haven Railroad and the Bangor and Aroostook both bought these State of Maine products boxcars in a red, white, and blue paint scheme. The New Haven bought and financed approximately half of them, and the Bangor and Aroostook bought and financed approximately half of them. So they were all the same class, they were all done to the same specification, including the paint job, and were used on both railroads, interchanging back and forth. There are a pair of folks from the New Haven inspecting what looks to be the brake rigging. Yeah. And we can't talk about the New Haven without talking about this. This is New Haven 0721, a Alco DL109, along with a B unit following and another A unit on the other end. This is in Dyer Brook, Maine. And we have this wonderful shot, exact dates unknown, but sometime between 1953 and 1954. This is a Ronald N. Johnson shot. This appeared in at least one, if not more than one, of the books written on the Bangor and Aroostook. And we have here something truly extraordinary, and that is an Alco-powered train on the Bangor and Aroostook, with a BL2 going the other direction. This was in response to a lack of motive power having been delivered to the Bangor and Aroostook for the winter of 1953-1954, and the New Haven was able to supply some DL109s that they had available that were spare power, and lease them over that winter. So here we go. But BL2 with a passenger inspection train, it looks going the other direction, being held on the main line while this freight goes around them. Quite the interesting shot here at Dyer Brook. Absolutely love this shot. One of the great things about the Bangor and Aroostook marketing department is that we have an awful lot of behind-the-scenes shots, things that not everyone got to see, locations that not everyone got to see. This crane has the Bangor and Aroostook Engineering Department, Holton, Maine, on it. This is quite possibly Horseback Pit in Holton. And we believe this to be either the late 40s or the very early 50s, based largely on the Studebaker truck, and that style came out after World War II and was gone by, I believe, about 1951. So sometime late 40s, early 50s, we believe. But wonderful behind-the-scenes shot. And, of course, behind the scenes, we find caboose number C68 riding the transfer table. This is almost certainly Derby shops. And fresh coat of paint, radio equipped. Jumping backwards a little bit in time, I believe this is C80 in a scheme that is best described as silver, with the large red, white, and blue with the Keystone Bangor and Aroostook logo. This is sometime in the early 50s, I would guess. It has a radio-equipped decal on the side of the caboose, indicating that we've entered the era of radios, and this is almost certainly Northern Main Junction. In fact, I can confirm that because you can see the little tube over here that was put in for people walking underneath the Bangor and Aroostook's main line. The Main Central's main line. And how does one ice the cars? Well, this is how you do it. You have a dump truck full of ice and a conveyor belt running off of another truck, and you simply drive both of these along next to the cars and fill them full of ice. Yep, that's how it was done. This is likely to be Northern Main Junction, although that's not a certainty. And these are some of the MDT refrigerated cars that the Bangor and Aroostook had on long-term lease. Also interesting to note are the crop marks on the photo. You'll see a few of these here and there. This was used by the marketing department to promote the fact that they had iced cars, and you'll see occasionally these penciled in or inked in crop marks, and I've left them on the scans to show where they were cropped. So there's a very good chance that if you've even seen this picture before, it was cropped before you saw it. So anyway. Again, behind the scenes, this was shot by the late, great Bruce Owen Nett. It created a bit of a discussion on the Bangor and Aroostook Railroad Facebook page. I had the date listed as July 21st, 1980. It turned out I had misread the back of the picture, and it was actually July 21st, 1950, which makes an awful lot more sense. Given the state of everything. But this is Burro Crane number S200, loading up scrap into a Pennsylvania Railroad gondola, approximately 1950. Most likely Derby shops. I think that's written on the back of the print. Speaking of behind the scenes, this is as far as I know, either unpublished or, if it's been published, I can't find it, photo of the management of the railroad taking a look at some of the track work that was being done. And we have this excellent shot of someone working with one of the track machines out in the hot sun. And, of course, there's no reflective vest, and there's no, there's none of our modern safety requirements, with safety glasses and such. The only consensus to safety is some heavy boots and some work gloves. And, of course, the management is out there in their suits and ties and having a look at the track work that's being done. Not entirely sure where this is. Also not entirely sure when it is. Late 50s or 60s is most likely. I believe we wound up finding out that this was a published picture at one point in the main line, and this was some new management coming in to observe the railroad, if I remember correctly. An undated photo from Northern Main Junction showing the behind the scenes of a whole ton of, literally whole ton of the temperature-controlled refrigerated, either reefers cars or refrigerated box cars, depending on the language being used at the time. You can see all kinds of potato barrels off to the left in piles, and you can see all of the hatches, of course, are closed since this is wintertime and we're not worried about icing these. We're worried about keeping them warm instead. A lot of the marketing department, by the way, photographs were taken in and around Northern Main Junction only because the railroad's offices were in Bangor, so it was easy for the photographers to get a hold of them. So speaking of behind the scenes, this is somewhere most likely on the backside of Northern Main Junction with a spreader and plow being run around the loop at Northern Main Junction, pushing snow out of the way. And this is sometime in most likely the middle 70s or sometime after that. Speaking of snow, in a much earlier shot showing that one of those burrow cranes, this one being X397, this is Caribou, Maine, on February the 18th, 1953, and it's an Alan A. Sharp photo. And when you don't have a big plow, this is how you remove snow from the yard, one bucketful at a time. Much later shot, we see one of the Bangor and Aroostook's cranes picking up a double-door boxcar. This would be sometime, I would say, late 70s, early 80s. Not entirely sure what's going on here in this picture, but it may have been just done as a training exercise to make sure they could do it. But it's also equally likely that somebody put a car on the ground. That happens. And speaking of behind the scenes, in case you ever wondered, this is how they washed the cars. It looks like a modified forklift with a washing attachment, and these are a bunch of cars, Bangor and Aroostook's 2000 series, being washed at Northern Main Junction sometime in, I would say, the late 50s would be my guess. Not entirely sure on that one. And back on our caboose behind the scenes, this is caboose number 69, which is one of the bay window cabooses, no cupola in extent, and radio equipped in the snow, no less. Unknown location, unknown date. And speaking of behind the scenes, this one, or a shot similar to it, was published in the original main line. A couple of gentlemen working on the section crew. I believe they were out of Holton, but I couldn't swear to that off the top of my head. This is how track work was done back then, and to a large extent still is today. Manually track jacking and sighting down the rail. Absolutely love this shot. Behind the scenes, we have the entire mechanized work gang out here, complete with a guy cooking. We've got motor cars. We've got probably a pettibone of some type. We've got all kinds of equipment here sitting in the siding. And what goes by on the main line but a BL2 leading a freight train. Wonderful shot. This is from the late, let's see, this would have to be the late 1960s. And it's just an absolutely wonderful shot that just kind of captures a moment in time on the railroad. And even in the snow, we still have to gauge the track, and it's being done with a manual track gauge and guys with bars and pickaxes. This is in Searsport at the pier. They are either loading or unloading. It's difficult to tell, honestly, from this ship to rail or the reverse. And yeah, it's just wonderful that someone was able to capture all of these behind-the-scenes images. Something not often seen, this is circa 1948. This is a log loading operation most likely by the Great Northern Paper Company. Note the small, most likely gasoline-powered switch engine. And this appears to be a loading operation pulling wood out of one of their lakes for presumably pulpwood service that would be loaded into these cars and then taken either to another lake and dumped in order to fulfill going to the mill, or probably straight to the mill and offloaded. And another behind-the-scenes shot much later. This is the LMS warehouse, Logistics Management Systems warehouse, at Northern Main Junction in construction. So a lot of these behind-the-scenes photos I've never seen anywhere else. And doesn't get much more behind the scenes than that. Two guys lowering a piece of track equipment off of a truck. This looks to be either a rail grinder or a rail drill, perhaps. Not sure which. I could be wrong on that. And this could be Holton, Maine. There was a large track division out there, but not entirely sure. And the date on that, I would say, would be late 50s, would be my guess. Speaking of the marketing department, the Bangor and Aroostook Railroad's marketing department had the great advantage of having large window displays available to them, and they took advantage of them. They used them for promotion of the railroad. And although I originally thought that they were marketing posters, they weren't posters. These were actually window displays that someone put together in the railroad offices, and then they had them photographed so that they would know what they had done in the past, and had a record of it. And Bangor and Aroostook was very progressive. They had multiple businesses that weren't railroad related specifically, including the Avis Rent-A-Car franchise, and also Rent-A-Truck franchise. And they had that for a good chunk of northern Maine. Feeling, of course, that they could rent cars through the passenger stations and such. This is one of my favorites of their window displays. Just simple message: free order service from shipments from Bangor. What's not readily apparent in this particular picture is that the bottom picture of the GP7 and the long line of red, white, and blue boxcars, they would use that. That's actually a cardboard cutout, and they would use that in a lot of these window displays, the same one over and over again, just to provide a little 3D effect, so to speak. And this is an absolutely wonderful, wonderful slogan. Be on the safe side. Build your potato house trackside. On Bangor and Aroostook Railroad, serving northern Maine. Yeah, I love this. The hand just model railroad style placing the building next to the tracks. And this was something else that they did. The Bangor and Aroostook had a bus division. And as part of that bus division, they had obviously had to promote it. And they ran buses on either their own routes or Greyhound routes all the way up into the 80s, the 1980s. I think it was 1984, I think, was the last bus. And they promoted their charter bus service as being available for people to charter a bus to go somewhere. And it was fairly popular. There's actually some pictures, not in this presentation, of a Boy Scout troop way out in the western part of the country. And they chartered a Bangor and Aroostook bus to do it. It was it was quite the service. And this is one of their charter bus posters or displays, somewhere other than where it was intended to be, that they grabbed a picture of it and stuck it in the file. Interesting things that you find in the file along with photographs, and this is a great example of that. Dated December 21st, 1976, for receipt in the marketing department. This was a gentleman Mr. Edward P. DeVito from Torrington, Connecticut, who had written about the possibility of obtaining a builder's plate from one of the BL2s. And apparently also a switch lock. Apparently requesting that he obtain one or both. And they wrote him back a very nice letter, CC'd to the marketing department, sorry, we're not letting you have any of our builder's plates, and we're not really replacing our switches with anything different at this time. So it was an interesting but very polite refusal. Of course, today, I'm sure that if you rode into a railroad asking that same question, you probably wouldn't even get a response. So it's interesting they took the time back in 1976 to even respond to the letter. And speaking of things that you didn't think you would find in the marketing department collection, this was an absolutely wonderful find. This is one of the standard plans that was produced by the railroad, showing the the GP38s. And what's awesome about it is that what has been written in are the details for the tricolor, also known as the circus colors paint scheme that was so famous on the Bangor and Aroostook. These have been written in here. Black tank, black side sills, standard Bangor and Aroostook, standard 20-inch numerals on cab white, silver trucks, footboards, front plate, etc., orange handrails and edges of steps, same as GP7s. 26-inch orange band, 3-inch white bands for the stripes. It's got all of the details here. Orange top, bring down to V on front. Cab, all orange, front, rear, sides, top. This was the first variation of the tricolor paint scheme where the cab was completely orange. And for the first time that I am aware of, we have this chart showing exactly how these dimensions are supposed to be. In the past, people have always guessed, but as far as I know, this is the first time that this has been made public, and this was just a wonderful find coming through the collection. It was just wonderful to find this. Had to be scanned in multiple pieces and put back together digitally, but it was just wonderful. For those that are not aware of me personally, I have a penchant and wonderful side hobby of night railroad photography, so it is particularly wonderful for me to find this particular night photo in amongst the collection. This is the tower at Northern Main Junction, and this is looking down the yard towards the direction of the interchange tracks with the main central. I don't have a good time frame for this, but 70s is reasonable. And this is, of course, a scene that is completely gone today. It looks completely different. The tracks have been moved. They've been reordered in certain spots. This switch coming back towards us no longer exists, or it may have been flipped and put push the other direction, but the direction of the track no longer exists. The tower no longer exists. And this is a piece right out of history, and it was just a wonderful find to find this. As it was to find this. We have a freight train stopped at the Presque Isle station. It was led by F3 number 41. This appears to be an extra, given the white flags. I'm assuming those are white. Might be a second section. They might be green. What's also interesting is that this is definitely a planned or staged shot. we have electrical cords running through the snow-covered platform. We have every light possible turned on the locomotive and on the platform and whatnot. So this is almost certainly a staged picture for the photographer to take. It's clear from some of the content of the marketing department collection that the marketing department was also, or perhaps it was Mr. Sprague himself, who was a fan of night photography, as am I, and there are several of these in the collection, and we're going to see a few of them. One of the other driving forces on the night photography side of things was Bruce Owen Nett, the photographer whose work appeared in many places on the Bangor and Aroostook and other railroads. Tragically, most of his collection, the negatives and transparencies and such, has been lost. So the prints that remain are unfortunately all that's left, and this is one of his. In 1982, the Bangor and Aroostook loaned the 42 to the Maine Central to run an Operation Lifesaver passenger train, and this is in Bangor Yard at Bangor, Maine, the night before that departed, and it's quite wonderful to see these two side by side, splitting a yard track, and to have it done at night is quite special. On the opposite end of things, this is a circa 1960 shot. This is number 54 in Oakfield. We see the Oakfield Tower built out of the old coaling tower, and we even have a ghostly crew member that's half in and half out of the picture. And this was just a wonderful find. So few people got up to Oakfield and photographed it compared to what was done on the southern part of the railroad. And just to see this with this wonderful night shot and this wonderful exposure was just a treat to behold when I came across this. This, of course, hits very close to home. This is Northern Maine Junction. This is one of the F3s. I don't have a good date on this, but I would suspect either late 50s or early 60s based upon the paint scheme of the locomotive. However, I am questioning the necessity of passing up orders, or what appears to be passing up orders. That wouldn't have been done, I wouldn't think, only because they had radio communications at that time. And the headlight, of course, is off on the locomotive, and I find that interesting. I suspect that this also may have been a staged photo put on for the photographer. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. This was actually the first night photo I found when I began to start scanning the collection. It was actually torn, scanned again in two pieces, put together digitally, repaired digitally, and it's an absolutely phenomenal shot from, again, believed to be the late 50s, very early 60s. This is Oakfield on the fuel track. Or the sand track. Sand track? Sand track, fuel track. Either way. Number 43, obviously. At night. Just wonderful. Absolutely wonderful photo. So wonderful, in fact, that when I was talking with a gentleman by the name of Rick Foss, he said, I'd like to color that. And this was the first photo of the Bangor and Aroostook that he colored using his methods of digital coloring of black and white photos. And it's such a spectacular job that I whenever I talk about this. I try to talk about his website and Facebook page, Memories in Color, and this is just a phenomenal piece of work, in my opinion, and it really, really makes you feel like you were there. It really does, and it's absolutely gorgeous work. Of course, you can't talk about the Bangor and Aroostook without talking about the red, white, and blue boxcars. This is actually a builder's photo that I found from the Magor Car Corporation of the 2000, the class car. And this one was also so iconic of the Bangor and Aroostook that I had Mr. Rick Foss color this one as well. And it did bring up the debate. Were the ends of the cars blue or black? And he believes, based upon what he was able to look at in terms of the coloration, that they were probably black. So they have been left black, as you can see. And speaking of cars, here's number 200. This is one of the sliding multi-door cars that the Bangor and Aroostook had. It is worth stating that the marketing department at the Bangor and Aroostook had pictures of almost every single type of car, often multiples, to be able to be sent out to shippers and to other people for use as illustrations as to what type of car they would be getting. And quite often those were taken at Northern Main Junction, often just after being refurbished or painted. Same here for number 104, one of the 57-foot mechanical refrigerator cars. And left this in place for historical purposes. You can see that they've colored in these little markings here around the wheels. That indicates that they want this photo altered in some way, probably to brighten up that area of the photo to make the wheels more visible. As you can see, they are quite dark. And this, of course, is a much later photo than some of the ones we've been seeing, as the mechanical refrigerator cars only really came into vogue in the 1960s. Speaking of which, however, this is a photo sent by Pacific Car and Foundry to the railroad, showing the inside of the mechanical refrigerated car that they had just built for them. This is a builder's photo of number 11206, and as you can see, sent by Pacific Car and Foundry to the Bangor and Aroostook for their records, showing the kind of refrigerated boxcar they had sent. They also sent additional detail pictures inside, but suffice to say, it was very interesting to come across those. And sort of on the other end of the spectrum, here is one of the very old boxcars of the Bangor and Aroostook, and this is number 10,113, built in, I believe it says 6 of 1925, I would think. I'm not sure. I can't quite read the last digit. But very old outside braced boxcar. And not sure whatever ended up happening to this one. But wonderful thing to find in the collection nonetheless. Interesting that this photo is in color. This is one of a relatively small number of photos in the collection that were in color. I mean, one has to consider at that time color reproduction, color photography, one, was expensive. Color reproduction of photography was even more so. And this would probably not have been used for marketing department purposes as a color photo. It would have been either turned into a black and white, or perhaps this would have been printed and used as a wall mural or some other sort of in-person advertising. The mainline magazine was done almost exclusively in black and white up until the very later portions of its life. And this is boxcar 2224, probably at Northern Main Junction. Wouldn't swear to that. But as you can see, resplendent in bright red with the the triple color herald. And I believe if we zoom in here tight enough, we may even be able to figure out built in 12 of 50. And I would say that's the paint date over there, 5 of 58. So I would say that that photo is most likely May of 1958, as that looks factory fresh, or paint shop fresh. Speaking of factory fresh, here's one of the rebuild of the log cars. These were originally designed to haul pulpwood widthwise across the car, where it would be stacked like a large pile of wood. They were then retrofitted to haul longer wood in the other direction, with the addition of these spines up and down the sides. This is BAR 1000, I believe the first one to be rebuilt in this fashion, or at least the class car. And as you can see, we have all of these straps holding the wood down. This is a very early shot showing this in green. They would later be blue. And it was a wonderful find to find this in the collection. Speaking of cars, here are some of the multi-door boxcars that the Bangor and Aroostook had. Not sure where this picture was taken, honestly. Could be Great Northern Paper, but not sure. And of course, you can't talk about the Bangor and Aroostook Railroad without talking about the chip cars. This is 3400. This is the Bangor and Aroostook's, I believe this was the first one that they did, was the 3400, the chip car. However, this was not done in the much more famous jade green that most people came to know. These are in fact brown or oxide red, but they are originally painted in that color and then repainted in the jade green with the large triangular logo on the other end. Or, excuse me, on the right-hand side. And, of course, a red, white, and blue boxcar somewhere. Not entirely sure where this is, honestly. It might be in Maine, it might be at one of the paper mills, or it might be off in the Willy Wags somewhere in the middle of, you name it. Could be Detroit, for all I know. But it's also equally likely that this is the Millinocket paper and mill. But again, not 100% sure on that, and I wish I knew. And of course, one of these interesting things about these boxcars is these MDT cars. They had these on long-term lease, and one of the interesting things about it is the when empty, return Bangor and Aroostook Railroad via service route signs. Those are not uncommon. I have one. But they are not exactly falling out of trees either. So I'm very glad to actually have a picture of one and show it in use in its intended purpose, not just on my wall. And of course, the Bangor and Aroostook had these sort of vertical striped, for lack of a better term, red, white, and blue boxcars. They bought these new. These are the 5950 and up series. This is 5976. Somewhere, not entirely sure where, but we can guarantee you that this was brought out here specifically to be shot by the company photographer, because I can't think of a single reason why one would simply have a boxcar with nothing else hooked to it sitting on a fairly photogenic piece of track in the middle of Maine somewhere. So my guess is that what you're looking at is a promotion shot specifically done for the railroad to use this. Although I have to admit, if it had been me, I would have seen if I could have possibly gotten a spot where I didn't have all those telegraph lines in the way. But, hey, you work with what you have. And speaking of those red, white, and blue boxcars, here's three of them at the Great Northern Paper Company. This photo ran in the original main line, and it ran in my reborn main line as well in the discussion of the red, white, and blue boxcars. And I can't recall the date off the top of my head, but we were into the late 70s when these were produced. The cars, that is. Now we're stepping back a full decade and more here. This is a Ronald Johnson shot from Ronald N. Johnson. Always managed to muff that up. In the early 60s in Presque Isle with 56 on the head end of a piggyback train. I mean, it's incredible. A BL2 with piggybacks. It's just sort of the thing that if somebody told you that had happened, you'd almost not believe it. But it did happen, obviously. And this is the Bangor and Aroostook's two-tone paint scheme, gray, blue, yellow stripe that was applied to the BL2s after their original gray on gray with the blue stripe with yellow pinstripes was painted over or repainted over. And again, left on here for historical purposes are the crop marks. So if you've seen this shot before, you most likely saw it only from these lines down. And another sort of behind-the-scenes shot. This is 2534, the Mox car. That's taken from another angle of the same time. And we're seeing loading of the boxcar. We have a bunch of business-type folks, managers of the railroad most likely, and taking a look at this conveyor belt system to load the boxcar. Not entirely sure with what, honestly. But whatever it is, it's a new commodity, and the business management came out to see it. Speaking of business management, we have a couple of gentlemen who are looking at a brand new, never been seen the rail yet, Bangor and Aroostook refrigerator car. As you can see, this is Pacific Car and Foundry, packed, the bearings and whatnot, 11452, built 152. So this is a brand new refrigerator car from 1952, and they haven't even put, looks like, oil into the bearings yet, lubricant into the bearings. So wonderful shot showing some pre-delivery inspection. And we can't talk about the Bangor and Aroostook, of course, without talking about the men and women behind it. And there are numerous shots in the archive of shots like this. Someone from the railroad coming to someone else from the railroad to present them with an award or thank them for service or something of that nature. Have an award of merit. Now, most of these would have been appeared in the main line, which is, again, the Bangor and Aroostook Company newsletter. And I'm sure eventually, as I go through all of the issues of the main line, I will be able to identify all of these people. But as it sits, I unfortunately don't have a lot of them identified. And we have, looks like a safety briefing going on here in one of the crew rooms. And this, originally thought 60s on the shirt, but nope, I'm thinking 50s now, because we have a passenger train in the background off the right-hand corner. This, I think, is the station in Caribou. One of the few brick stations, and I could be wrong, but I think that's the Caribou station. The gentleman is unknown, but again, sometime in late 50s would be my guess. Right in front of number 80, the last GP9 purchased by the railroad. And we're not sure who the gentleman is, but he's getting some sort of an award. This gentleman worked for the railroad, I believe, as a carpenter, and had built this hutch. And they ran an article on him as a human interest piece in the Mainline magazine. I have to dig that one out and get his name and put it in here. Wonderful stuff like this also found. The June 17th, 1982, the Maintenance Away Tie Gang on the Fort Fairfield branch put in 1,108 new cross ties, establishing a record in an 8-hour period, and they stopped and took a photo. Or actually, I think they took the photo sometime later. And that would have been a very, very good record, in my opinion, in 8 hours. And of course, we have these behind-the-scenes photos, showing gentlemen driving around the Bangor and Aroostook. This is up north somewhere. I want to say outside Ashland. And we have the Bangor and Aroostook company cars. So, wonder where those are today. Speaking of cars, here's the gentleman working the Avis and Hertz rent-a-car counter. Like I said earlier, the Bangor and Aroostook had the Avis franchise here in the state of Maine, and they may have had the Hertz as well, based upon that sign. Oh, absolutely love this shot for the atmosphere alone. This is most likely in derby shops in Milo, and it is extremely hard to get a shot of someone welding, let alone stick welding, and it appears to have been managed in this shot. This is probably late 60s, I would guess, but unsure. Behind the scenes, working on the railroad, here we have a gentleman apparently going for the moon landing. No, not really. They're going in to clean out a tank car. An extremely noxious experience with all the fumes and stuff that show up in these tank cars. So he has donned an airproof or airtight sealed suit with air tank. Oh, yes. Cutting parts off of boxcars or something. That might be a 57-foot mechanical refrigerator car, but not 100% on that. But just such a wonderful behind-the-scenes photo. Old-style safety goggles and an acetylene torch. Mm-hmm. One of the station agents, and they ran an article on this in the original Mainline, had a very strong artistic thumb and painted many northern Maine scenes, including some of the railroad. And this was one of the pictures from the photo shoot that they did of him painting. I just can't resist someone using a cutting torch. The sparks are flying, and it's such a visually interesting photo. Again, probably taken within derby shops. Oh, this poor guy. This is doing something that I'm not a huge fan of heights. Don't mind a ladder, but I mean this is climbing a pole, for crying out loud. Not for me, thank you very much. Unknown as to exactly where or when, but this gentleman clearly is part of the signal crew up there working on the telegraph lines. We were able to identify this man. This is a gentleman by the name of Martin Grant. And if I were to guess... actually, I'm not sure. I was going to say that looks like Brownville to me, but that may or may not be the case. But we've identified the man. We haven't identified the location. We haven't identified the date. But that's one thing down. And we'll have one of these days I'm going to do a deep dive through the original main lines and try to find all of these images and people. Northern Main Junction. My guess is that the man on the left is the operator of the Northern Main Junction station, where inside the station office on the ground floor of the station, what would become or what had become by this time no longer a functioning passenger station, but was an office and such. And you can see we've got the typewriter, we've got the CTC board, and out the window we have the tube to go underneath the main central's mainline tracks. Wonderful shot. So many safety awards, and these safety awards were so talked about within the magazine for obvious reasons. You wanted people to be safe, and they promoted these safety awards quite highly. Oh, this was a wonderful, wonderful shot. This was a gentleman by the name of John Swallow, who was involved in the bridge and building force out of Oakfield for the Bangor and Aroostook Railroad. And I came across this wonderful picture of him. I do not remember why this was taken of him, but we believe the location to be Fort Kent. And we believe this to be moving one of the railroad buildings to a new spot within Fort Kent. But the image itself is so wonderful that Rick Foss colored it for me and did this phenomenal job of getting all of the facial features and really pulling you into this picture. It's just an incredible image, particularly when it's colored. And this appeared on the cover of one of my Reborn mainline magazines in color. But you can't really talk about the men behind the Bangor and Aroostook without talking about this shot here. The gentleman is, although he has penciled it in, he is hand painting the American rail fan underneath the repainted 557 in 1980. This gentleman was the sign painter for the railroad, and as you can tell, he's, like I say, freehanding this, although with pencil outlines, and did such a phenomenal job that, to my knowledge, this has never been, may have been touched up, but it's never been repainted, and no one has ever attempted to try. And if you go see 557 in the Coles Museum today, you'll see this man's handiwork. It's still there. Speaking of the 557, this is a wonderful aerial shot from Northern Main Junction showing the 557. So this is in 1980 on a excursion trip, which I believe was actually sponsored by the 470 Railroad Club. So some of you that are watching this may have been on this train. And of course, from an interesting perspective, this is one of the few overall pictures that I have of the in the collection of the yard itself, because of course one does need a plane, and it's sometimes hard to get a plane in the air over Northern Main Junction. The shot in question is from 1980 and was taken by a L.W. Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T, and in the B&A collection. While we're on the subject of flying over things, here's Searsport. This is a shot, I'm going to say from the 60s would be my guess. But this is the port at Searsport, I do believe, complete with its pier, and across the way there, this should be the, yeah, there's the passenger station right there, Searsport Station, and out through here, this would be U.S. Route 1, and the Bangor and Aroostook's trackage right there. So yes, so that's Searsport. I'm going to say probably post-World War II would be my guess, either late 50s or early 60s. And while we're flying over things, this I believe to be Interstate 95 being constructed. And obviously over the tracks of the Bangor and Aroostook, next to a couple of potato houses. I'm sure that the spot is almost unrecognizable today, but we're hoping that with enough research and obviously being relatively close to at least a small town, that we'll be able to identify this spot. But it does appear to be a 1, 2, 3, 4 lane highway under construction. And this was in the main line, I assume, for the purposes of being discussed as a talking point that the highway is coming. And what is this going to do to our business? Much happier times, we have the Bangor and Aroostook Railroad float going through the Presque Isle. I want to say this is the 150th anniversary of Presque Isle or something like that. Let's see. I'm curious. There is a movie title there, The Tea House of the August Moon, which is a 1956 film. So I would say that we are looking at 1956 in Presque Isle, Maine, which would jive with the Studebaker Larks that the Bangor and Aroostook was using as company vehicles at that time, and would jive with all of the other vehicles that I'm seeing. Yep. And speaking of being in the public eye, here's the community chest results for the accounting department, and they all appear to be raising a paper glass for their raising of $618.50 for some cause. And I have no doubt that I can identify the people and such when I go through all of these photos. But it's just a remarkable moment in the history of the railroad to see people raising money for a cause. Of course, at the end of Steam, they donated a bell to the Bangor YMCA Camp Prentice from the Bangor and Aroostook Railroad. This is July of 1959. They donated this bell. I don't know what happened to it. I would like to think that it still exists somewhere, but I don't actually know that. But here we are, and with a young man giving it a pull and giving it a nice clang. Believe it or not, this was written up in the Mainline magazine, and the gentleman in question was a Bangor and Aroostook employee, and he did all of his savings in change, and then took it in a wheelbarrow to cash it in. Of course, a little promotion shot. These potatoes furnished by the Maine Potato Council. Half the potatoes are, of course, what made the Bangor and Aroostook the Bangor and Aroostook. And speaking of which, this is the 1960 arrival of the Potato Blossom Queen upon her train, coming into probably Northern Maine Junction, if I recall correctly. And it is very interesting that the Bangor and Aroostook would sponsor the Potato Blossom Festival and the Potato Blossom Queen, of course, because it tied in with the economy of the Bangor and Aroostook. And I love this picture. Kids and the Bangor and Aroostook and somebody dressed up in their father's or grandfather's trainman hat and outfit holding a lantern. A wonderful human interest shot that did run in the original main line. And of course we have railroad executives speaking to kids at schools. They did this a fair amount. The Bangor and Aroostook was very conscious of its image, particularly surrounding children. And skipping forward a little bit in time, this is the Canadian Expo was it 74, I think? 72? And they commissioned this large-scale train to run around the State of Maine booth that the Bangor and Aroostook sponsored, complete with the State of Maine products boxcars. 82 was done up in its solid blue paint scheme, which was current for the time, and, of course, the red, white, and blue boxcars followed. Interestingly enough, this train still exists. It's at the Booth Bay Railway Village. And, of course, always being interested in kids and the youth, here we have some kids on a tour of what looks like either the back shop at Derby, most likely the back shop at Derby, I would think. Could also be Northern Maine Junction, but the couplers, I would think, would probably be Derby, would be my guess. Passenger train excursion to somewhere. Actually, not sure if this is an excursion or if this is a group on a regular train. But this is somewhere up north, and based upon the cleanliness and the uniforms and whatnot, I would say this is before passenger service was ended in the 1960s. So my guess is late 50s on this one. I don't believe we've been able to identify any of the people in the photograph, unfortunately. Of course, this was one of those other fun excursions that the railroad did. This was the so-called gondola excursion with a whole bunch of people obviously riding in the gondolas in order to facilitate the fan trip. And I think actually this was also a 470 Club excursion, or it might have been the Down East Railroad Club. But this is at Mosquito Mountain, which is between Frankfort and Prospect, Maine. And this is the group getting off, and I believe they're going to do a photo run-by at this location. And here they are further south. This is closer to Searsport. And we see the tables and the chairs, and everyone seems to be genuinely happy that they're out in the open air. Glad it didn't rain. And speaking of people and inspecting things, here's a group of the Maine engineers out along the line somewhere. Good guess that this might be either the north end of Northern Maine Junction or perhaps somewhere in the South LaGrange area, given the signal and the double trackage. But that's a guess. This, I don't believe I've been able to date. This one, however, we can date and tell you a little bit about what's going on. This is the railroad's 75th anniversary train in 1966. And we have a gentleman speaking to a group of kids as they are lined up and ready to take a tour of Refrigerator Car 100. Here's the entire train. They purposefully grabbed one piece from the railroad's rolling stock. Different. There's one representation of the different types of cars, and that was to show off not only what the railroad can do, but also to provide shippers and whatnot with the idea of this is the kind of cars that we have available that we can service you with. And we've got everything from logs to paper to a trailer on flat car. We've got wood chips in here. We've got the red, white, and blue box cars. We've got refrigerated box cars, and of course tank cars and open and closed gondolas. Hopper cars, excuse me. Before that train kicked off, however, they had to buy locomotives 81 and 82. We believe that this was the day that those arrived on the property, so this is March of 1966. This also appeared in the Mainline magazine, or at least one of the shots did. There were several taken that day. And sometime later, 81 wasn't looking so good. Something happened, not entirely sure what. It looks like that it was either hit or rolled or both. The left side, the fireman's side, has almost as much damage as the right. The front has damage. The rear has damage. And I have a whole series of photos in the marketing department collection showing this and the damage. My guess is that these were taken for insurance purposes. But it does definitely show how mangled this beast got. Let's see here. Wonderful shot here from Jerry Angier, I believe, showing one of the refrigerated boxcars and the ship that it's being transloaded onto in Searsport. Wonderful shot through this building door here. It's just a great image. And we can't, of course, talk about the Bangor and Aroostook Railroad without talking about its customers. And here are two of the International Paper Company cars loaded in New Sweden, I believe it was. I'm sorry. These were in St. Francis. No, sorry. This is April 11th, 1952. They are loaded with peeled spruce and fir, and it was taken at Clisham, Maine. Bound for St. Francis, I'm guessing. I think that's the reference to St. Francis. And when the Sears and Roebuck Company in Presque Isle decided to have a trainload sale, they had a trainload sale. And they even put their salesmen out in ship B&A hats and kerchiefs to match. They also don't look terribly happy about it. Much later in the Bangor and Aroostook's history, we have this interesting shot of Penobscot Frozen Foods out of Belfast, backing up one of their tractor-trailer trucks to a double-door boxcar. I think they actually had these staged as a loading dock in order to facilitate loading into other cars. Speaking of loading cars, here we are with some material. Not sure what this is. Looks like plywood, might be very thick paper or cardstock of some type. Into one of the state of Maine red, white, and blue cars, so this is probably late 40s, early 50s would be my guess. This shot, however, we have a firm date on. This is a transformer being delivered to Great Northern Paper in April of 1953, complete with the crane to offload it. Not sure where this is exactly. And, of course, speaking of customers, here we have an entire car of sugar beets being turned over and unloaded. The sugar beet plants were up in Aroostook County. They began to grow them as an alternative crop to potatoes. And because, of course, they can only grow them during a certain time of the year, they actually were hauling in sugar beets by the carload from Searsport, from other places, in order to be able to keep the plant going. This would have been for, I can't remember if they were refining the sugar or if they were doing starch out of the sugar. But either way, that's an entire Bangor and Aroostook car being turned over and sugar beets being dumped out of it. Wonderful photo here, cropped and used by the the marketing department at some point. This is number 56 on a director's special, sometime 1953-ish. This may, in fact, be the same train that we saw earlier, waiting for that DL-109 to go by with the freight, but I'm not sure of that. I also don't have a good location on this one, I'm afraid. This one, however, we have identified. This is 44, much later. This is in 65, 67, somewhere in there. Circa 68, I have written on it. This is in Holton. And this is an inspection train complete with a dynamometer car. Oh. And what are you going to do after you're done inspecting your train? Well, you might go to your camp. This is one of the former Bangor and Aroostook cabooses turned into a camp. I don't really know where this is. There was an article run on at least one person that did this in the Mainline magazine, and I'm going to be following up and finding out where this was. But as you can see, they've added a deck to it, and I mean, you could still tell it's a caboose, but it's kind of altered the character a bit. Wonderful color shot here from milepost 12 in Prospect, Maine, 1965 or thereabouts, with 79 in its blue dip paint job, headed into the sun, and a string of State of Maine products, red, white, and blue cars on behind. This is most likely a train that was stopped specifically for the marketing department to take this shot. And speaking of locomotives, the 801 was riding the table at Northern Main Junction in 1973. It was sent for rewiring from the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western as part of a deal that they did where the D&H wound up with some SD45s and the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western wound up with some locomotives in return. So the Bangor and Aroostook was able to provide the shop capacity to make the job done. That's how well the shop forces were regarded. Oh yeah, and if you look carefully, way up in the background on top of the tower, looks like there's some guys up there working on it. There's another thing that I'd rather not do. Yee. And speaking of locomotives, Morrison-Knudsen 5001, arguably the most unique locomotive to ever grace the Bangor and Aroostook. It was brought up for testing with its Sulzer diesel, German-powered Sulzer-sourced diesel. It was run back and forth up here for several months. Engineer Wayne Duplessis wrote up the report on it. He really liked it. However, they never went and sold any domestically. Interestingly, the locomotive still exists, and it's actually in New Jersey. It was repowered with an EMD power plant, and it wound up being owned by the Morristown and Erie. Speaking of shots that are quite interesting to me, went through and was looking at this shot and couldn't figure out who this was. This was a shot taken by Richard Sprague, who was either the vice president or the assistant vice president or vice president of marketing for the railroad, depending on the year that we're discussing. And apparently he wanted to run an article on railroad safety and staying away from the tracks and such. And he needed someone who had been injured to do it. Oddly enough, he found his son. This is one of Mr. Sprague's sons. And he had been injured in a skiing accident. This had nothing to do with the railroad. But he borrowed his son and brought him over to Holton near the yard and got him up on one knee in his cast and his crutches on the ice, which I'm sure was probably quite fun, and shot several frames of him in and around the train, looking at the train and whatnot, trying to pitch safety, and he did run an article and start a safety campaign based upon this. Interesting also in the marketing department photo archive is this night shot of a conductor waving his lantern. Well, the interesting thing is that if you look very closely, you'll see that this lantern has been modified, and there is actually an electric light bulb inside of it and a cord running over the conductor's shoulder. And this shot is very much staged and very much quote-unquote fake, which makes me feel a little bit better about some of the times that I've been told that my night shots looked a little too fake. Up on the northern end of Northern Main Junction, the 62 was probably freshly painted, and Mr. Sprague most likely went up there and took a shot of it. The companion shot to this appeared on the original main line on the front cover of one of the issues, and this shot appeared on the equivalent issue some decades later on my Reborn main line. This shot was used by the railroad's marketing department for a variety of purposes up until the tricolor locomotives came in and took over. This is a marvelous shot that is somewhere up in Aroostook County along the Aroostook River. And this was, again, not necessarily staged, but they definitely were aware that the train was coming because you have to hike into this spot. And the train was most likely either moving very slowly or was completely stopped. And this classic snow scene is absolutely amazing. And what's even more amazing is that in the marketing department collection, this is in color and is a large format transparency, which I have been able to scan at an extremely high resolution. And this picture is absolutely phenomenal, and I am so glad that it has survived. And just to leave you with a shot that is incredible to end this presentation, this is Oakfield, Maine, in the engine terminal at night, sometime in the middle 60s would be my guess, early to middle 60s. And this appeared on the cover of one of the original mainline magazines in black and white because they weren't able to produce it in color. This is also a large format transparency that I found in the collection and have scanned and present to you for the first public unveiling of this photo in color, possibly ever. And I will say that this will be appearing on the cover of a mainline magazine, my Reborn one, at some point in the future. It is an amazing photo, and I think it's too good to keep hidden. So thank you all for watching,